The resolute Dawn moved like a tired old workhorse through the dark stretches beyond Pluto. Its hull bore the scars of a ship that had patched itself together too many times to count, but the engine still hummed with stubborn determination. Wesley Traynor sat in the captain's chair with his hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the liquid inside long gone cold. He had stopped tasting it hours ago, his mind circling the same thought over and over. The universe was supposed to be empty out here. Anything yet? Wesley asked, his voice steady but carrying the weight of fatigue. At the console, Mara Linton leaned back, her boots propped against the edge. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands escaping and framing her face in a way that looked careless but was deliberate enough to keep her eyes clear. She was tapping the side of her headset, frowning at the readings on the display. The scanner isn't broken. That's all I can promise. But if this thing isn't a glitch, then we're staring at a signal coming from nowhere. Nowhere's a big place, Wesley muttered. From the pilot's seat, Dylan Kessler swiveled around, his grin half hidden by the dim light. He was younger than both of them, too young, Wesley sometimes thought, to carry the kind of confidence he wore like a second skin. Not nowhere, Cap. Right there. He jabbed a finger at the star map. Kuiper Belt object, one of the unlisted ones. Except it's, well, not exactly a rock. Wesley finally stood, setting his mug aside. He leaned over Dylan's shoulder and narrowed his eyes at the cluster of readings. The blip was steady, too sharp-edged, too precise to be natural. He didn't need Mara to tell him what it meant, though her voice came quietly anyway. It's built. The words settled over the cabin like a weight. Humanity had been scanning and probing the solar system for centuries, yet there it was, a structure no one had reported, floating far beyond the warmth of the sun. You thinking what I'm thinking? Dylan said, his grin faltering only slightly. I'm thinking we should leave it alone, Wesley replied, but he didn't move to give the order. Mara slid her boots back to the floor and sat upright. We can't just fly past. Something that size doesn't just appear. If it's alien, then it's history. If it's human, someone's lying through their teeth. Wesley didn't like either possibility. His gut told him to turn the ship around and keep his crew safe. But his gut also told him they would never forgive him if they walked away from something like this. Fine, Wesley said at last. Bring us in slow. Careful burn, keep the sensors wide open. If something looks wrong, we're gone. Dylan's hands were already on the controls, the ship pivoting toward the dark mass ahead. At first it was only a shadow against the stars, a needle of blackness that didn't catch the light. Then, as they drew closer, its size became terrifyingly clear. The structure was immense, taller than any skyscraper on Earth, rising like a smooth spire carved from obsidian. No thrusters, no visible power source, just silent geometry. Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. That's no satellite. That's not even close. The resolute Dawn coasted closer, and a docking port became visible, marked by faint lines of light running along its edges. Don't like how it's welcoming us, Wesley said, his jaw tightening. Maybe it wants a hug, Dylan offered, though his voice cracked a little. Against his better judgment, Wesley gave the order. The docking clamps engaged with a hollow thud, and the ship trembled as the airlocks aligned. Inside the spire, the corridors were impossibly smooth, curved, and echoing. Their helmets picked up no atmosphere at first, then suddenly there it was, breathable and crisp, as if the structure itself decided to allow it. The three of them moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing too loud. They reached a central chamber, vast and spherical, lined with panels that pulsed faintly like veins of light. At its heart stood a column of glass-like material. It hummed with an energy that prickled the air around their skin. What is it? Dylan asked. Mara didn't answer right away. Her hand hovered over the column, curiosity and fear pulling her in two directions. It feels like a relay. Or a beacon. Wesley grabbed her wrist before she touched it. We don't know what it does. But the chamber had already begun to respond to their presence. Lights spiraled up the column in a sequence, faster and brighter until the room blazed white. A pulse of energy burst outward, rippling through every wall, every surface, then exploding silently into the void beyond. The three of them stumbled back, shielding their eyes. When the glow finally dimmed, the column returned to its quiet hum. What the hell just happened? Wesley demanded. Signal, Mara said, her voice hollow. We just lit a beacon. And we have no idea who's listening. They didn't have to wait long. Minutes later, Dylan's comm crackled with interference. He slapped the side of his headset, but the static turned into a deep vibration that rattled their bones. Then the ship itself groaned as if the very space around it were bending. Through the viewport, The stars began to vanish behind a wall of shadow. At first it looked like a trick of perspective, a patch of darkness sliding across the void. Then it grew, taking form, blocking constellations with its sheer enormity. A vessel, too massive for the human mind to accept, slipped out of the black like a predator rising from the deep. None of them spoke. The silence was worse than any alarm. The alien ship moved without sound, without haste, settling over the spire until it blotted out everything else. Then a beam of light swept across the resolute dawn. The docking clamps released with a sharp jolt, and the salvage ship was pulled gently, inevitably, into the waiting mouth of the Leviathan. Wesley tightened his grip on the railing until his knuckles went white. Mara stood frozen beside him, lips pressed thin, while Dylan's bravado finally gave way to wide-eyed fear. "We didn't find history," Wesley said softly. "History just found us." And the doors closed behind them. The docking bay of the alien ship swallowed the resolute dawn whole. Its walls stretched so high and far that the salvage vessel looked like a speck of dust inside a cathedral. Blue light glowed from strips embedded in the ceiling, illuminating rows of towering figures that stood waiting. Their armor gleamed like polished stone, each plate etched with geometric patterns that looked less decorative and more like warnings. Wesley Traynor, Mara Linton, and Dylan Kessler stood at the airlock in silence, helmets still sealed. They could hear nothing but the thump of their own hearts and the hiss of oxygen through their comm units. "Maybe they're not hostile," Dylan whispered, though his voice wavered. Mara glanced at him. "Yeah, and maybe they're just here to invite us to dinner." Wesley didn't reply. He kept his gaze fixed on the figures outside. They didn't move, didn't raise weapons, didn't even tilt their heads in curiosity. They just waited, an army of statues carved from shadow. The airlock light turned green. Pressure equalized. A hiss signaled the opening of the outer door. Wesley stepped out first. His boots hit the deck with a hollow clang, his breath loud inside his helmet. Mara followed, her posture tense but her chin raised, while Dylan trailed behind, trying hard to mask his nerves. The figures parted as the humans approached, creating a path toward the far end of the hangar. At its center stood one figure taller than the rest, not armored but robed in something flowing, metallic threads shimmering with each subtle movement. His eyes, pale and unblinking, locked onto them with a calm so absolute it felt unnatural. A device on his wrist projected words into the air, symbols rearranging into sounds that matched their language almost perfectly. "You are a human." The voice was even, almost gentle, but carried a weight that pressed against their chests. Wesley forced himself to nod. "Yes. We didn't mean to trespass. We found the structure out there and—" "You activated the beacon," the alien said, cutting him off without the slightest change in tone. Mara crossed her arms. "We didn't exactly get a warning label." One of the armored guards shifted, but the robed figure lifted a single hand and the movement stopped instantly. His calm never wavered. "I am Praetor Luthien of the Valoran Empire. This vessel is the Dominion. You now stand in the presence of an authority older than your world's history." Dylan swallowed hard. "Valoran Empire?" he muttered under his breath, as if saying the words made them more real. Praetor Luthien regarded him, expression unreadable. "Your species should not yet exist in this space. And yet here you are. Unafraid." Wesley shook his head. "We're afraid. Believe me. We're just not about to fall apart because of it." Mara let out a dry laugh. "If you expect us to faint and beg, you're going to be disappointed." The praetor studied them in silence for a long moment, then finally turned and gestured. The path ahead opened wider, the guards stepping aside with mechanical precision. "You will accompany us," Luthien said. "Your species is unknown to the Empire. That will change now." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Wesley gave a subtle nod and they followed. They were led through corridors that felt more like temples than ship halls, every surface curving seamlessly into the next, lit by veins of faint light that pulsed in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. The Valorans walked in perfect silence. No murmurs. No shifting of armor. Even their footfalls seemed to vanish before they echoed. "This is insane," Dylan whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're inside a ship that makes Earth look like a junkyard. And they just stand there like statues." "Keep your voice down," Wesley murmured back. Mara smirked faintly, though her eyes stayed sharp and watchful. "Relax. I'm sure they don't mind us gawking. We're probably the best entertainment they've had in centuries." They entered a chamber filled with hovering panels, projections of stars and worlds dancing in midair. Luthien turned toward them, his pale gaze unwavering. "The Valoran Empire spans 400 systems," he said. We govern not through violence but through stability. Order. Come. Chaos is disease. Fear is weakness. We eradicate both. Mara muttered under her breath. Sounds like a nightmare spa brochure. One of the guards stepped forward threateningly, but Wesley raised a hand. She's just processing. Luthien ignored the interruption. You will undergo evaluation. If your species proves compatible with our order, you may endure. If not, you will be corrected. Dylan frowned. Corrected? What does that mean? The Praetor's expression didn't change. Compliance? Or removal? The words landed like a blade. Wesley felt his stomach tighten, but he forced his tone to remain steady. We'll cooperate with your evaluation. But Earth isn't your property. We won't just roll over. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The guards shifted slightly, armor gleaming, waiting for the command to strike. But Luthien only tilted his head, as if examining something curious under a microscope. You speak as if you are equal, he said softly. Most species we encounter collapse at the first breath of our authority. You resist. Even in fear you remain calm. Mara stepped forward, eyes locked on his. That's what scares you, isn't it? That we're not breaking the way you expect. For the first time Luthien's pale gaze flickered. Almost imperceptibly, but enough. The humans were escorted back to their quarters under guard, a small, seamless chamber with no visible doors or seams. The walls pulsed faintly, the light never changing. Dylan sank onto the floor, running a hand through his hair. We're dead. We lit their beacon, now they know about Earth. We're screwed. Not dead yet, Wesley said. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, trying to keep his own fear out of his voice. Mara paced the chamber, restless energy sparking through her every step. Did you see them? They weren't just calm. They were empty. Like nothing touches them. That's not stability, that's hollow. Wesley stared at the faint pulsing light on the walls. Whatever they are, they've built an empire on silence. But if they think Earth is going to sit quietly in their cage, they're in for a surprise. Outside their chamber, two Valoran guards stood silently. One leaned slightly toward the other, speaking in their own language, a murmur too low for human ears. If they are this calm now, the guard whispered, what happens when they are cornered? The other did not answer. The chamber walls peeled away without a sound. One moment Wesley, Mara, and Dylan were sitting in a seamless cube of lightless stillness. The next they were standing in what looked like an open plain beneath a gray, colorless sky. The air smelled faintly metallic, the ground beneath their boots crunching like shattered glass. Okay, Mara muttered, turning slowly in a circle. Either they've drugged us, or this is one hell of a simulation. Wesley crouched and touched the surface. The shards beneath his hand shifted like brittle crystal, cold and sharp. He stood again, his face grim. Simulation or not, it feels real. Which means the pain will probably feel real too. Dylan let out a strained laugh. Great. So we're trapped in some Valoran VR death game. Fantastic. A voice filled the sky, calm and measured, each word rolling like distant thunder. This is the stability trial. Adapt. Endure. Submit. The last word echoed too long, as if the sky itself insisted on it. A jagged ridge tore itself upward in the distance, shards of crystal rising until they formed walls taller than skyscrapers. A gateway appeared, a black archway lit by a faint, pulsating glow. Wesley squinted at it, then looked back at the others. Something tells me we're supposed to walk through that. Mara raised an eyebrow. And if we don't? The ground answered for them. It cracked violently, a fissure opening at their feet. Heat and light flared up from below, forcing them backward. Dylan cursed and stumbled, catching himself just before he slipped. Yeah, Mara said, brushing shards off her sleeve. Door it is. Inside the archway the air grew heavier, the light dimmer. The corridor twisted unpredictably, like it was alive. They passed walls that seemed to breathe, surfaces rippling as if reacting to their presence. This place is wrong, Dylan whispered. It's like it's watching us. It is, Mara said. They're studying every move we make. Wesley pressed forward. Then let's give them something to watch. The first trial came quickly. A chamber opened around them, filled with shifting platforms suspended over a void. Each one tilted and swayed as if daring them to fall. Dylan frowned. So, jump the rocks or die. Real original. Mara tested one of the platforms with her boot. It wobbled dangerously, then steadied when she shifted her weight just so. She grinned faintly. It's not just balance. It's rhythm. You move with it, not against it. Wesley nodded and followed her lead. Dylan, muttering under his breath, tried to copy their movements but nearly went down twice. Mara caught his arm once, Wesley the other. By the time they reached the other side, Dylan's forehead was slick with sweat. "Okay," Dylan panted. "That was mildly humiliating." Mara clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, kid. You only almost died twice. That's progress." Despite himself, Dylan cracked a grin. The second trial was worse. They entered a space filled with walls of fire that shifted like living creatures, cutting off paths at random. The heat was brutal, the air searing their lungs. "We're supposed to submit," Dylan coughed. "That's what this is about. They want us to give up and let it kill us." "Not happening," Wesley said firmly. His voice cut through the roar like steel. Mara's eyes darted around the shifting flames, calculating. Then she grabbed a shard of crystal from the floor and tossed it into a nearby firewall. The flames recoiled slightly at the impact, shrinking for just a second. Her grin widened. "Well, look at that. The big scary test has a weakness." Working together, they started throwing shards to disrupt the flames, carving paths through the inferno one section at a time. It was exhausting, dangerous, and sloppy, but they pushed through. When Dylan collapsed to his knees at the far side, Wesley pulled him up with a grunt. "That's twice I've saved your ass today," Wesley muttered. "Yeah," Dylan panted, "but who's counting?" Mara smirked. "I am." The third and final trial hit hardest. They found themselves in a wide, empty chamber with no visible exit. The air thickened until it felt like their lungs were filling with sand. Voices began whispering in their ears, low and insidious. "Submit. You are fragile. You are nothing." Mara pressed her hands over her ears, but the voices drilled straight into her head. Dylan staggered, his eyes wide, his breath coming too fast. Wesley stood rigid, fists clenched, fighting to keep his thoughts clear. "This is their game," Wesley said, forcing the words out. "They're trying to make us believe it." The whispers grew louder, overlapping, clawing at every doubt. Mara's knees buckled. Dylan muttered something half incoherent about being worthless. Wesley grabbed them both, shaking hard enough to jolt them back. His own voice broke with anger. "No. Listen to me. This is noise. That's all it is. They can't tell us who we are. They don't get to decide that." Mara forced herself upright, her eyes blazing. "Damn right." Dylan sucked in a ragged breath, then nodded. "Screw their voices." The chamber quaked. The whispers turned to screams, then cut off abruptly. The walls dissolved, leaving them standing once more in the Valoran observation chamber, panting, battered, but alive. Praetor Luthien stood before them, his face unreadable. "You endured." His words were calm, but something about them carried unease. Others begged for release long before the end. "You did not." Mara, still shaking, managed to smirk. "Sorry to ruin your experiment." For the first time, the praetor's expression flickered. Just for an instant. Then he turned away. "You should not exist," he said softly. "A species this young should not be this unshaken." Guards closed in, but Wesley noticed the hesitation in their eyes, the faintest hint of something that had not been there before. Not respect. Not yet. Something closer to fear. The humans were escorted back to their quarters after the trial, though quarters was a generous word for the seamless, glowing cell they had been confined to since capture. The walls still pulsed with the same faint rhythm, a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. The three of them slumped into silence, sweat-stained and exhausted from what they had endured. Mara was the first to break it. She paced in tight circles, running a hand through her damp hair. "That wasn't just a test. That was them trying to break us. And the fact we're still breathing? That's what's got them rattled." Dylan sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at his hands as though expecting them to shake. They weren't. He looked up, eyes wide, a crooked smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my life. And yet, I feel like we just punched a giant in the teeth." Wesley leaned against the wall, arms folded, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Giants don't like being punched. Don't start celebrating yet." The door dissolved open without warning. Two armored Valoran guards entered, followed by a smaller figure in darker robes. Not Praetor Luthien, but another official, sharp-eyed and severe. He didn't speak at first, only studied them like one would study a strange tool. "You have unsettled the Praetor," the man finally said, his voice translated into their language by a faint projection. "He will not admit it, but I see it. You resisted what no other young species has resisted. That alone makes you dangerous." Mara crossed her arms. "Dangerous? We just survived. Isn't that the point? Survival is not dangerous," the official said evenly. Defiance is. Before Wesley could reply, the man gestured and the guards guided him out. The door sealed shut, leaving the crew once more alone. Mara exhaled sharply. So, half of them want to kill us, the other half want to lock us in a zoo. Nice options. Maybe not all of them, Wesley said quietly. He had caught something in the official's tone. Not contempt. Not even hatred. Something closer to calculation. They didn't have to wait long to learn what he meant. Later they were led to a vast chamber unlike any they had seen yet. The ceiling arched high above, shimmering with starlight as though the very fabric of the universe had been draped across it. Dozens of Valorans filled the space, seated in sweeping tiers that curved around a central platform. The humans were guided onto that platform, under the scrutiny of an empire. Praetor Luthien stood at the far end, his robe gleaming under the cold light. His words echoed through the chamber with chilling composure. The species called human has been uncovered. They are untested, untempered, and yet resistant. Already they demonstrate traits unsuited for integration. Their calmness in the face of power suggests instability. Their defiance is a seed of chaos. A murmur rippled through the tiers, voices overlapping in a language the humans could not follow. Some leaned forward with clear interest, others stiffened as though offended by their very presence. One figure, robed in crimson, rose to speak. The translator rendered her words sharp and clipped. We should eliminate them now. A young species that resists submission will only fester into rebellion later. Why permit the disease to spread? Another, older figure stood in response, voice deeper, slower. To destroy them is to admit fear. They have done nothing but endure what we set before them. If endurance alone threatens us, then perhaps the weakness lies not in them but in us. The chamber erupted in debate, voices rising and falling, calmness slipping at the edges. Mara leaned toward Wesley, whispering, "Did we just start a family fight?" "Looks like it," he murmured back, his eyes locked on the praetor. After hours of tense exchanges, the humans were escorted out. Their path back to confinement took them past a massive viewing port, where a Valoran world rotated in the distance, a planet veined with silver cities that stretched across continents. Dylan stopped, staring. "Holy, it's beautiful. And terrifying. Look at how perfect it is. Not a single scar, not a single crack." Mara rested a hand on the glass, her reflection hovering faintly over the shining world. Perfection isn't real. You can't build a world without cracks. They've hidden them. Buried them. Wesley stood silently for a long time, then finally said, "No empire lasts forever." They were pushed onward. That night, if time could even be called night in a place with no stars, Wesley woke to a faint sound. A small, circular panel in the wall had slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a simple cube of metal, glowing faintly with etched lines. He lifted it carefully. A message flared across its surface in human-readable script. "If you want to save your species, do not return home yet. The Empire is already moving toward Earth." Wesley froze, the weight of the words crashing down on him. Mara stirred beside him, groggy but sharp-eyed when she saw the cube. Dylan blinked awake, rubbing his eyes until he saw the message too. Mara swore softly. "They're not debating us. They've already decided." Dylan's voice cracked. "Earth has no idea. We can't stop this. Not with just the three of us." Wesley stared at the message, his jaw set hard. His fear was there, deep and heavy, but beneath it something stronger burned. "They think calmness makes us weak," he said quietly. "They think silence is strength. But they don't understand us. They don't understand what happens when humanity is cornered." The cube dimmed in his hands, leaving them in pulsing half-light once again. The Valoran Empire was no longer a wall of calm authority. For the first time in centuries, it was a house with cracks. And through those cracks, 3 humans had just walked in. The cube's faint glow faded to nothing, leaving only their reflections on the seamless wall. For a long while none of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than the trial had, heavier even than the council's debate. Finally Dylan whispered, "If that message is real, then Earth is already marked. We're sitting here while they move on our families, our homes, everyone we left behind." Mara gripped her knees, staring at the floor. "That's exactly what they want. To break us apart from the inside. We need to think, not panic." Wesley hadn't moved. He was still holding the cube, his jaw tight. "Someone inside that council slipped this to us. That means not all of them want us destroyed. There's division. Division in their empire doesn't save Earth," Dylan snapped. His voice cracked at the edges, desperation leaking through. "We're nothing here. Lab rats. How are 3 people supposed to stop an invasion? The door pulsed with sudden light, silencing them. It dissolved, and in stepped the same robed figure who had spoken against the praetor in the chamber, the one who had said destroying them would show weakness. He carried no guards this time. Only a look that flickered between calculation and something closer to unease. You are correct. The translator rendered his voice low and steady. The decision is made. A fleet will move toward your system within the next cycle. Mara rose to her feet sharply. Why tell us this? Why even bother? The figure studied her, then Wesley, then Dylan. Because not all of us agree. Some believe your species should be tested, not annihilated. There is a fracture. One you have already widened simply by surviving. He leaned closer, his eyes dark and unreadable. The Empire is not what it once was. The calm you see is a mask. And masks can crack. Then help us stop them, Wesley said, voice low but firm. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he extended a hand, revealing a thin strip of metal no larger than a finger. Its surface shimmered with unreadable symbols. Take this. It is a key. But it is not freedom. Not yet. If you use it, you will not be able to return home. You will remain within the rift between factions, a spark in a storm that is already building. Mara's throat tightened. What happens if we refuse? Then Earth burns and you burn with it. Quietly. Quickly. A death that will be remembered as nothing more than the tidying of a mistake. He pressed the strip into Wesley's hand and turned away. The door dissolved and sealed again, leaving them in a silence that was no longer heavy, but suffocating. Dylan let out a trembling laugh, though there was no humor in it. A key. To what? Another cage? Mara sat down hard against the wall, her hands trembling. We don't have a choice. If we go home, we lead them straight to Earth. If we stay, maybe we buy time. Maybe. Wesley stared at the strip of metal in his palm. It felt colder than anything he had touched since capture, colder even than the void beyond the glass. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried no trace of doubt. They think calmness is strength. They think silence is control. Let's show them what happens when humanity stops being calm. The lights in their cell pulsed once, twice, as if the ship itself had heard him. Outside, unseen by the 3 humans, a fleet was already aligning, its shadow stretching toward a blue planet far away. And Earth, blissfully unaware, still slept beneath its stars.